Good afternoon, everyone. Jed Green, final boss here at ORCA. And today I've got a special guest with me, Miss Larissa Darnaby, Landmark Solutions. I really appreciate Larissa coming down today. We've kind of got a special presentation here for you today. This is something where we're going to discuss what has been going on with the Bureau of Narcotics certificate of occupancy requirement and some history of how we got where we are today. Obviously, myself, someone that's been involved in the program from day one as a director of the 788 campaign. I do everything that I do with ORCA for the last 4 years. And, we're the leading advocates against government overreach. And so obviously we're involved in that process. A lot of y'all know us. Ms. Larissa is with Landmark Solutions and one of the premier land use experts in the state, and has helped a lot of folks through the COO process, and has really just been side by side helping us in this fight for the last 2.5, 3 years now. So, yeah, Larissa, I just appreciate you, stopping in.
Yeah, my pleasure. Man, 2.5, 3 years. It has been that long.
That was a lot of time on the phone a couple of years ago working to sort through this, and I know that you've been busy, really busy, and we'll get more into that. What I would like to do here for this video is I'm going to start by simply I want to run down through kind of the timeline of about 7 years of program. I promise I'm going to keep this quick, and we need to talk about how we got here. So in 2018, we passed State Question 788. Immediately after that, industry folks, community folks got together with lawmakers. We got the first bicameral, bipartisan working group granted to us by Pro Tem Treat and Speaker McCall. Governor Fallon at the time had said we were going into special session if we passed, because a lot more laws were needed. 788 being a 5-page measure. We passed it. She reneged, decided not to go into special session. Industry worked with House and Senate, and everyone was ready by a critical date, which was September 10th of 2018, for lawmakers to take action before the program implemented and licenses started being let out. So there's a big public record on this. There's a lot on this on YouTube, what this working group looked like that was formed. But the bottom line is that our industry stepped up, and we had something known as the Unity Bill, which covered in depth certificates of occupancy, local codes and things. And ultimately that was not adopted. We did not go into a special session. OMA started handing out licenses. By the spring, a much thinner version called Skinity was passed. And in Skinity, what happened was the Senate decided to cut out all of the volume of law that dealt with COOs, and instead of created a COC, or a certificate of occupancy, that local authorities could give out. Some charged money for it. Yeah. And that's what everyone was told all across the state. And so, especially folks in rural Oklahoma, we got a COC, we got licensing from OMMA. OBNDD happily gave us registration. Remember, OBN was not in 788. That was something that was put in that Skinity bill, where they were brought in and we were simply told to give them a $500 registration. So everyone did that. OBN took everyone's money and continued to do so. And so so off and running we were. We saw an explosion of licenses for a variety of reasons. But at the end of the day, those high license counts, remember, these agencies put them into business. They registered them without looking twice, even if there were 600 licenses to one email. Both OMMA and OBNDD did this, so they put everyone into business with the COC. And so now you fast forward, you kind of get through to this time now where we've had this explosion. It's 2022, and the agencies are talking among themselves, kind of what this looks like. And I say the OBN, the OMMA, and the State Fire Marshal talking about this kind of explosion of licenses. They had met for about a year at the behest of the State Fire Marshal. Those talks ended roughly around the end of 2022. And then, with no notice to industry, no rulemaking process, no laws, the director of OBN, through director's authority, created a supplemental packet in early 2023 that new registrants were now required to fill out. And that form, I believe, is dated January 25th, 2023. So this started raising alarm bells over here because OBN was saying their basis of this is, well, you're supposed to be in compliant with state law. You have to have this by state, this COO by state law, even though we were all told and registered otherwise. And so they put this out there. Now, it's pretty obvious that by that time, that OBN was fully aware of the fact that there were a huge number of licensees, especially manufacturer registrants, which are grower and processor licensees, did not have a COO. We'd been told we didn't have to have one. Folks had reached out to the fire marshal and they said, get a COC. In some cases. So OBN, without notifying us any rulemaking process or even notifying the other agencies, particularly the fire marshal, created this demand. And they soft rolled it out on new registrants, but then went to apply it to renewal registrations in 2023. So I actually talked with OBN and the fire marshal at length in June of that year. I was called in to meet with them. That went on for about 3 hours. And one thing that you will see as a result of that meeting was that the supplemental packet that came out in August of 2023, I believe August 18th, had a separate page on the back that distincted that outdoor grows may not need a certificate of occupancy. My point was, how do I get a COO on a field? You know, so there was some modification there. But that really kind of got things kicked off, and I'm sure that's, Larissa, when you probably started maybe getting some phone calls and a lot of folks needing the services of a group like yours, you know. So that's kind of where we were at. Is that kind of track, or is, you know, kind of the time in 2023 that you started, you know, seeing volume, you know? Tell us about that, but also just, you know, just take a couple of moments and just tell us just a little bit about kind of your background in dealing with fire code and land use and such for municipalities.
Yeah, so I started in land use in 2003. Actually, it's almost my 22-year anniversary. On the 20th of October will be my 22-year anniversary when I started in Jinx. People have heard me say it before. I was literally typing COOs on an actual typewriter in Miss Shirley's office in Jinx America during, if you were around that time in 2003 to 2007, we did thousands of permits in that time. And so it was just 2 building inspectors, myself and a city planner in our department. And so it was interesting. After that, I ended up in Owasso as the deputy director of development, and I mean, did well over 1 million square feet of retail development, among other things. Had the TCC, TTC campus go in, largest annexation in the state at that time, Stone Canyon. So, and then after that, I went and did about 12 to 13 months in Catoosa, where I did that whole development that's across from the Hard Rock. So a lot of experience in navigating complex statutes in the event of Stone Canyon. The project in Catoosa was really difficult as far as like lot lines and things like that. So just very good at cutting down the weeds and getting to things done. As far as when I started with this and cannabis, you know, it was never really a major service that I ever needed to offer, was to get people certificates of occupancy, because if you were in an urban area, then you had the development staff to be able to answer these questions and to help people navigate that in their own development services departments. And it was just kind of always widely accepted that in the rural areas, you didn't have enforcement of code. Of course, there were certain uses that the fire marshal's office would always focus on: schools, like hospitals, nursing homes, anywhere that you'd have a large population of people that would have difficulty exiting a structure in the event of an emergency. My family has owned businesses in rural areas. I can tell you, like, the Able Commission uses these COCs, the health department uses these COCs, and it's in recognition of, hey, there's a way that we need to let people know in an area that this business is going in, so they don't just go in undercover type situation. but also in recognizing the limitations of businesses to be able to get functional in rural areas. Yeah, so OMA followed the very same path as those agencies up until 2023, like you said.
Yeah, and then there was kind of a big flip up. I spent a lot of time early on myself, late teens, early 20s, as a general contractor, and did a lot of work out in rural Oklahoma. And even in a town like Tahlequah, the running joke was a building permit costs you $100. The fine for not having one is 50. You know,
In the
and
city of Tahlequah, or
yes, in the city of
yeah, yeah,
Tahlequah, and this is like say circa 2000, right? But I
yeah,
mean, it's one thing we all know anyone that's lived in rural Oklahoma, folks don't have a CDC, don't have a COO on their barn. They don't. There is just a huge lack of them, and
well, it's not just a lack of them on a barn. There is statutory exemptions for agricultural
for
business
agricultural,
that
right?
are not open to public and they're in unincorporated areas. So it's not just that they don't get them, it's that they are statutorily protected from them.
Right, right, which is really interesting because on a lot of levels, especially some of the, hoop houses that have no
Yep.
electricity are, agricultural structures by any other
Well, heck, I grew up
standard.
on a farm and you have electricity to almost all of your greenhouses in some capacity. They would still have been viewed as utility. It's a really odd distinction for anybody to consider a greenhouse, regardless of the amendments, as an F1, but
Right, right,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah. So,
Not a
so
hill worth dying on that one.
Right. So here in 2023, all of a sudden there's kind of this demand. I mean, let's talk about this for a second. Why this is, what one of the fundamental issues of this, I think, is capacity. Right. My understanding is that the OBN basically surprised both us and the state fire marshal with creating a demand overnight for services that the capacity simply wasn't in the ballpark of existing for.
Yeah. So basically what you have is we've had this fire marshal's office that has been enforcing state minimum standards. I don't want to say enforcing, but has a state minimum standard adopted by the OUBCC, which was created in 09. You have the first adoption on Commercial Code 2012, but they're not out there actively like looking for businesses operating to shake them down. They're there as a service basically for the people that have insurances, policies that want that to cover it or whatever it is, but they're not actively enforcing. So whenever you have the OBN basically quasi legislating on another agency's behalf by, forcing registrants to have to go and get the COO, the fire marshal's office at that point can't say, we're not going to do this. That's the service of them. I think, you mentioned it a little bit in your intro, but I do personally have clients with email correspondence from the state fire marshal's office where they were told, I mean, one is like back and forth with several members of the fire department's office. Like, do I need to get a building permit? And the final order, not order, but the final email from the executive assistant to the state fire marshal, like not front of the house, but the executive assistant said, if you build a new building, you need to, but otherwise you can just go get your COC from the locality, the county at that point where they were located. And that was in 2020, the end of 2020, or it might have been even 2021, I don't recollect. But I've got another client that actually had to go to a hearing, their first hearing in district court last Thursday, a week ago today. And they also have a thread of emails where they were asking, do I need to submit for a building permit? And we're told, at that time you don't.
Right.
So
Right. And so prior to OBN's unfunded mandate on the state fire marshal, do you have an idea of how many permits and COOs the state fire marshal would deal with annually, as opposed to kind of what that was looking like? I mean, just that demand itself, it almost like created the need for several thousand overnight at a minimum. If not, if we're running COOs on hoop houses and things like that, we're talking the need for 20 to 30,000 of them created overnight. So I mean, about what was the fire marshal doing annually before this demand?
According to their own reports and verbal accounts, they were saying around 1,200. They have a slideshow presentation on their website that was there prior to this enforcement. It's still there right now, and it says, it's about 1,300 annually, but they go into numbers at that point. And so they had 1,300 projected annually that they would facilitate. At that point, you had 6 field inspectors and a couple of plan reviewers. They said that it was expected on each project about an average of 8 emails back and forth. They say very clearly, we cannot give you code advice. We cannot help you with your design. Basically, we're bare bones as it is here. And this is, again, before marijuana. We're bare bones here. We don't have the capacity to assist you in your design work. We do about this many a year. And they had a 97% rejection rate at that point. And you have to think about things going in rural Oklahoma at that time. Dollar General's all the same layout. I know there was a big issue with Atwoods and Stigler that they wanted, you need to build over 12,000 square feet, which is when you get into triggering fire suppression potentially without firewalls. So this has been an issue since before weed, but then imagine now, also I think it's interesting to point out that you're going to have each site is basically one building by and large for businesses that are applying at this point. Greenhouses, I can only group so many in. So if you've got farms with mini greenhouses, I've got some sites that have over 20 permits on them. Mm-hmm. And not only do you have 20 permits on them, you're now reviewing something that you've never reviewed before, because how many times do you think they've reviewed greenhouses? We're going to have you put fire alarm monitoring system in them, which I think is extremely dangerous without doing some serious due diligence, because those things are going to trigger. And then you're in rural fire departments, like volunteers and unmarked vehicles showing up in the middle of the night to a marijuana grow. Like if it wasn't even a marijuana grow in Oklahoma and you're showing up in the middle of the night with an unmarked vehicle, it's probably going to get dangerous. But again, we've been rushed into this compliance corner, but nobody's had time to even sit and have a conversation on what is compliant, what's the procedures, what's the processes, what's the expectations, how do we manage this? And so last I heard, they have about 30,000 permits in there. Compared to their normal 1,300.
So they've got about 30,000 waiting as opposed to 1,300.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is 2 years in. So again, this kind of brings me back to that point where, it's like OBN and Fire Marshal, OMMA, they talked at length. Oh, I don't see how OBN can say that they were not aware of what the SFM's capacity was. And we're probably fairly aware that they were absolutely going to swamp that system.
Yeah.
And objectively, there's no way that the state fire marshal ever really had a chance to be able to take this influx. I mean, there was no legislative process where OBN says, hey, we're going to do this. Legislature, state fire marshal has a chance to say, we're going to need to hire like 20 more people to even begin to do this. We're going to need an appropriation for it. Again, this was all director's pen and remains to this day to be, at OBN. So, that's, I think it's a real tragedy there. And I just, it's like the year that OBN decided they were the fire marshal type of a deal,
And I've said this a lot. I think that we could easily get stuck in the weeds. I've done this for 22 years.
Right.
So I'm not going to try to say like, oh, I believe that the OBN did this intentionally. I believe that this was all targeting. But again, removing the weeds, how do we look at this from a place of understanding what's really happened here? Because you mentioned it in the intro, in the beginning, you would just file for your OBN, $500, basically a pulse. I don't even know if they checked if you're alive, but
right.
You get your OBN if you got an OMA license. Well, that's the exact same procedure that you have for all the other registrants that OBN has as well. And so that's been kind of one of the interesting things that has come out in court a little bit, is that one of the claims is constitutional due process and then also selective enforcement. Mm-hmm. And they've, my understanding has basically said that they were not aware that there were other registrants of theirs that don't have COOs. And again, how would you know unless you're asking?
Right.
But there's a lot of veterinarians, there's a lot of DOs, there's a lot of nurse practitioners, and there's a lot of those in places that don't have AHJ. You have a locality that up until the OBN enforcing the fire marshal's rules had no idea these things existed. I mean, as recent as last week, I'm getting an email from a county commissioner saying, we don't have zoning, we don't have code. I'm like, I get it, you don't, but the state does. And now they're actually like making everybody do it. Mm-hmm. And so just because, but again, like there's never been that conversation between the state fire marshal's office and these localities, because again, they've been bombarded. So how can they manage, their relations with localities and, hey, this is the expectations. If you don't have it, then we do. Here's the list that says if you have it or not. If you want it, here's the process to do so. And then on top of, don't even get me started on the statutory limitations on, understanding who can do that, who can't do that, and that framework, and which has been dealt with at this point. But it's it's a really big mess with so much pressure on it that nobody's ever been able to actually, I believe, at the local level and the state level, get aligned on what that looks like.
Yeah, yeah, definitely,
You
definitely.
can tell me to shut up too. I can go on a tangent,
No, no, no. Yes, as always, you're good. I mean,
Yeah.
this is, that's what we're here to do. Is we're, here to, give you guys some insight to know, some degree of what's been going on, what we've been doing as an organization, folks who we've been working with to do this. Our goal, because we are political, so I will get into a little bit of conjecture here and there. Pardon me, but I just say, hey, that's obvious, there you go. But have been, so that really kind of brings us to the point where I want to talk about, okay, so everyone gets hit with this by OBN, folks start scrambling, we've got, they create an environment that even led to people getting scammed by, scammed by predatory actors. It was really, really bad. So, but by this time we see what's going on, and so of course ourselves as an advocacy organization and others that care, got to work to see what we could do to help support these businesses and give them a share take. It's just patently unfair, in our opinion, for the state to put you into business, take your money, tell you everything's fine, tell you this is what you need to do, and then simply, with no notice, one agency director with the stroke of a pen do something with the impact. I mean, this is a big Title 75 issue, with what they're supposed to do to any new rules, how that the economic impact on the businesses. I mean, it was just a director's pen, and to this day, a director's pen makes this all stop. Unfortunately, our director does not seem to inclined to do that. So we get kind of November 1st, 2023. We've hit this first deadline where OBN wanted everyone to, have this packet in as part of your
Well, they
registration.
that even though they said as long as you're working on it and you let us know, you're fine. They kind of created this soft, cozy like spot where
That
hey,
they did, yes,
It
yes.
wasn't till January 19th.
Yes, that's what
Yeah.
that's what it was. Tell us where you're at.
Yeah.
We know everyone's applying, and then so now we get into January of 2024, and this is where OBN now sent out their first round of notices for show cause hearing, correct? To come in
Yeah.
and say, hey, give us a reason we shouldn't shut you down because you do not have your COO. And again, everyone being told up to this point, we're working with you, so on and so forth. Now, one thing I want to say at this point, kind of what we had during this time, and these are going to be some relatively round numbers, but there were about 2,500 manufacturer registrants that got this notice. And what we saw was that immediately 800 to maybe 1,000 of them never actually replied to that, which is a big red flag. And as we've talked with OBN over the years on this, and this was going on, the one thing that cannot be denied is that this bureaucratic exercise was actually initially one of the most cost-effective ways to actually catch up on enforcement. If you've got folks, say in this first group out of the 2,500, that don't even respond, as I told OBN, what do you bet? They're probably doing something else wrong out there. So if you're not even going to respond, if you're not even going to show up for court, and then you saw where those folks, they left, they were gone. And so to that end, it's a very effective enforcement mechanism that they utilized. So that then gets you down kind of the remainder, and you've got another group that in that time, about 1,000 or so, that have since decided, okay, market's not good, this isn't worth doing, we're going to go ahead and exit now. And so, there's that. but now we're kind of down to this smaller group now of about 700 to 750 folks, from what I understand, that are now faced with the prospect of are we going to go and defend against an unjust administrative process in district court? So I just kind of wanted to break those numbers down. And, my message to OBN for the last year and a half, actually from the very get-go, when we sat down and talked about this, said, guys, this is what this is going to look like. You're going to hit this point. All these people are not illegal. A lot of these are good people that have got their life savings in this. And you're going to hit a point where there's going to be resistance to what you are doing, because there should be. And you are taking these people's lives. So, and I've been clear to lawmakers even recently, as a taxpayer, when I look at how my dollars are spent, when I look at how those enforcement dollars are spent, okay, hey, you scared off 800 bad guys. Great, that was a great move. You did that with a piece of paper. But now when we get down to it, this is horrible expenditure of our dollars as far as enforcement goes. The cost that it will bear the state to have to now run through hundreds of these cases is a real drag on their resources. They do something like get rid of all of the illegal synthetic marijuana that's being sold in our gas stations and such, without going down that rabbit hole. So
It's not just a burden on the state, though. It's now specifically a burden on Oklahoma County. So,
well, yeah, there's that. But let's back up here to where, so we get into November 2023. We see what's going on. This is a mess. We can tell that our people have no chance. A lot of folks have no chance to be able to hit this, because we're up against a capacity issue that's a 30x factor on the fire marshal. The fire marshal knows it. OBN has now told us in January that we're going to have these hearings. So this is where we start getting to work with our lawmakers.
Yeah.
A lot of folks reached out to lawmakers knowing this is patently unfair. And so we started talking with them, and we were able to get initiated a Senate Bill 1635 with Senator Coleman. And 1635 initially was a bill that, interestingly enough, and this is why it was in the ballpark, was that it authorized municipalities to create an inspection program of all of your fire code stuff, which, as you know, this is something that they can do if they are an authority having jurisdiction on file with the fire marshal. And you've done a lot of work to help those counties and municipalities do that, I think, with some success. We had talked a lot about this, worked on some of it in the fall. Tell me a little bit about what that's looking like, or what that has looked like, because the point with 635 is written is, you're duplicating functions there's already a system there. These folks can do this, but now you're creating this separate thing that just continues to build on the issue as opposed to resolve it.
You've heard me say this, I'm sure, many times. There is a major issue with like nesting statutes and legislation in a way that works. And it's very bad at the state level. So your authority having jurisdiction, again, prior to the creation of the OUBCC and the creation of state minimum standards, you didn't have that. You just had municipalities or counties operating under the titles that jurisdict those. And those are very different roads to how they can do that. And there are limitations on the county side. There's a lot more liberties on the city and town side. But basically, the whole premise is that any locality does have the inherent right to jurisdict its built environment. And that's just, from my background, that's just across the country, because each area has its own thing, their own, Jinx is more tourism now, like, which is the shift that happened when I was there, right? You have the whole, like, if a Walmart leaves, then what do we do? Like, we got to figure it out, right? But now you have this enforcement from a state agency that's got all of these businesses that are going out. And I just remember from 2023 talking with leaders in, at this point, more cities and towns, and the impact that they felt because the sales tax is going down, because you don't have as many people driving to work at these places and stopping and getting groceries or fast food or gasoline. And I can tell you all of those metrics are highly monitored by economic developers and things like that. I mean, the technology that exists is crazy. We can go into a Walmart and tell you what's bought on an hour by hour basis. That's how they know what to stock, or go into a gas station and say, this is the zip codes of the cards being used here. So that tells me that people live in town, utilize a service, or they're driving through. So you start to see a big impact at the local level. And then once you have the issue come out in January 19th that we're now going to have hearings for this, I'm like, all right, well, we're going to need to work with counties. Mm-hmm. And that's not something that had ever needed to be done before, because again, things built in counties generally, a lot of these businesses did go into existing barns or utility accessory structures, right? But now we have an impact that is it's far reaching. And so I start working with counties at that point. And at this point, we've only got 2 or 3 counties that have come online, but I've got about 5 more that are working towards it, talking with their ADAs right now and been on their agendas. The counties weren't as inclined to move forward until an actual revocation. I mean, I can tell you, like, very honestly, and some of these meetings are recorded, but ADA saying, well, they can't do that because it's not due process. And I'm like, but they are. But once the revocations came in place, now these counties are like, well, we have to do something. So that's kind of where we're at now. I think we've had over 60 some odd cities and towns come online since all of this.
Yeah, and that was, and again, that was, I can't tell you how much I appreciate, your efforts in working to do that, because, it's one of those things where, with ourselves organizationally as ORCA, we're always looking for solutions and working to press those. And this is obviously it's a local issue. Local economies are being impacted by this. And so it made sense. Well, the problem is manpower at the state fire marshal. Let's support these local authorities taking that authority to help relieve that. But even seeing that, given the sheer volume, we knew that this was a impossible task, not only for us, but for the fire marshal as well. And that's part of what made it our impossible task. So we engaged on that bill 1635, and what we asked for was language that basically, in short, would have given everyone until June 1st, 2026 to actually have not just a permit, but an actual completed COO.
Yeah.
So we got that going in the process. And that was all fairly straightforward. It was a 4-page bill. We worked with Senator Coleman. I really appreciate his ear and his help on that. I'm sure that he called the fire marshal and got the fire marshal's take on it. Again, this fire marshal's wheelhouse, and so we got it through it. It's still known that it was going to need some work. Interesting floor debate on it, but we got it over to the House with the title off, meaning it could still be worked on. And so from there is when it got really, really interesting. I'm not going to spread it all out, but I just want to show you guys kind of what happened from there. This sheet here is actually just the bill history of everything that happened with 1635. Folks that are familiar with this, this isn't normal. Okay, we have things on here where we have untimely floor amendment, but we have an amendment to an untimely floor amendment. I mean, it went wild, and here's why. Once that bill got through the Senate, OBN took objection, and I want to make sure that everyone's clear on what this looked like. And without separating all of this stack right here represents 10 different versions of 1635 that occurred over the legislative process. And it, in short, we've got the record of it. I could really, really go into it, but it's pretty simple what happened. We got relief in a bill from the Senate to give folks time. And yes, that would have let everyone out of the OBN's jaws, out of their trap, in my estimation. And so it would have been reasonable. It would have righted the wrong that was being committed. Well, this got over to the House, and OBN got a hold of it and got a in-committee substitute that basically took the language and kicked it back to where instead of a date of June 1st, 2026, it would have been like originally June 1st of 2023,
I
something
think that
like
we
that.
need to really punch on though, because a lot of people may not understand. Like, so when it went to the House, you've already had it get passed by the Senate.
Yes.
And I remember, like, my clients will know, I'm like, listen, like, this made it. This is so great. Like, I remember you and I talking, like, dude, I think this might actually, like, work out. This is going to be fantastic. And then I think you had to talk me off the ledge a couple times in the days thereafter.
Well, it got wild. And I mean, just to summarize, and we can nail this down to dates, but I mean, it would, even if I just go point by point, it's 10 minutes. But here's basically what happened, folks, was we got the bill over from the Senate. OBN was not happy about it. They got a hold of it. We caught them in the 11th hour as this thing was going out of committee to a floor vote and got it pulled off the floor. There were then 2 days of negotiations beyond that where we got to a form where, and the big debate in this was the date. It was
Yeah.
all about the date that was getting set in there. And ultimately, through very tortured process, what got through the House, still with title off, which means this is going to conference committee, was a date that I believe was, you know, we had come back with one, they had come back with one. That's what all these versions and weird amendments. But it summarizes up to, I believe, where it was set at November 1st, 2024, which was still not where we were looking to be. So what happened was it went into conference committee, and the House and Senate picked a date basically in between of November 1st and July 1st or June 1st, 2025 that we had in there. And or 20 no no of 20 2025.
The first one was 2026, then it was
Right.
2025.
Yeah, you see how all over
Yeah.
the place this is, but ultimately what happens is we land with the February 1st date that you see now, which is what created the safe harbor. That created that date of what's known as the safe harbor. So you've got folks before that, folks after that. We were obviously working to push for a later date and had it.
Because it's the last week of session on top of this. Like, it's
Yes.
not like we're also like, this session's going to end. It was very
Right.
stressful.
Yeah,
but
we got down to the very end, and that's ultimately where we landed. And what's crazy is along the way, guys, in the middle of all of this, remember something called final form testing had been killed on the House side, and we managed to pick it up as a hitchhiker on the way through. Guys, this is like running through a battlefield and us having to pick up the poor orphan kid.
Yeah.
At the same time, we're trying to fight 10 opponents at one time. It was so bad, but we got it done. And really happy about that. I thank you. I thank everyone for all of your help. And that's, kind of what set the basis there for this. And that's what that looked like. So I know
and we
that.
still weren't satisfied with that, though. I do
No.
want, I've got, and my clients know I've had you emailing reps. I've got dozens of emails to reps and senators. We didn't care what the date was, so long as it was, we now have a goalpost. We know what the date is, and it's not 4 or 5 months ago.
Right.
Like, we can manage this now. It's just, it's very much like a pulling the rug out from under feet this whole time.
Well, and this is the thing, to know about, and this is something I don't think a lot of folks really realize about the way that OBN operates and the way this process has gone. Okay, so let's take a look at this timeline wise. They call everyone in January 1st. Now this coincides with the legislative session, and what we see are a couple of bills. We see a bill in particular, 3567, in which they was billed as a cleanup bill. This is just a cleanup bill. The classic 3 red flags words that you hear at the Capitol. This is a cleanup bill. And they said, we're just cleaning up definitions. Well, I dug into it and found that there was a section where OBN wanted to put into law that you were basically not allowed to present evidence at your administrative hearings, which then short circuits your ability to present evidence in a district court appeal. They were literally, while they had everyone called in, while they were waiting for those processes, remember, they can put their foot on and off the gas on these administrative processes. What they were working to do is they realized, hey, we've got a problem. We got a lot of people that fight. We don't like the rules that protect your rights. We're going to try to get them changed before we actually push forward these hearings. That's why you heard, okay, January 5th, we're going to start these in late February. And then it was, we're going to start them in April. And then it was, we're going to start them in June. They were literally using their power to push these hearings off while they saw what they could get done with the legislature to advantage themselves. In other words, literally moving your legal standing out from underneath you. That's why those delays were happening. And what they ran into was us. They ran into us on 1635 coming back and saying, hey, we've got an option. That same day that 1635 was going through the Senate, this other bill they had, 3567, and again, thank you to everyone. A special shout out to Representative Humphrey. JJ, thank you for your help in doing the right thing, and that is saying, hey, you guys are out of control in this ask just to do this to these folks and take away their constitutional rights. Doesn't matter what the industry is, this is fundamentally wrong. We appreciate that. So, you know, and this is what we see with the OBN. They don't like the ground they're on. They know they're on legally shaky ground, and so they literally try to change the law. And fortunately, we were able to get that defeated in 3567. And so that's where you saw then after that, they kind of started working these processes. And you alluded to this earlier, not alluded to it, but you mentioned something in the ballpark, and that is there is a bill this year, I can't remember if it was Senate Bill 315, which one it was, but we caught where OBN was working to now require that any district court appeals had to be heard here in Oklahoma County, pushing potentially in what has turned into a giant unfunded mandate on a county, which, as you noted earlier, Oklahoma County, Tulsa County, between the municipalities, the counties, we don't have COO issues here. Yeah. So what they've done is pushed all of this mess from all across the state into Oklahoma County. That's what they wanted to do with this bill. We blew them up on that. Thank you, everyone over at PCA who actually helped out with that, and all our ORCA folks that helped out. We put a call out. We caught it before committee. Y'all raised hell about it. We got legislators' attention, and we got OBN to tell us and lawmakers that this bill, if it was passed, would not be applied to everyone with the COO stuff. Well, that's not what they did in retrospect. Lawmakers, I want you to remember that. They didn't just misrepresent to us. They misrepresented to you. You know, we've got all the video on all of this. So, you know, that is what OBN habitually does. And folks need to understand that, especially those that, you always have the super spunky folks that feel like they've got a great relationship with an agency at the moment and say, well, if everyone was just doing their job as a legal business, this wouldn't happen. Guys, what we're describing is not normal. You're talking about an agency that actively through these bills attempts to change the playing field even on these legal processes. And so ultimately, they did get that through this year. We're, going to be talking to lawmakers about that again in the fall, and credibility issues with folks that are willing to go to that extreme. So a little opine there, and that's my opinion. Okay, so
obviously for me, I don't have the same background with these agencies that you do. Like, just dealing with the Senate Bill 1635 was kind of like Schoolhouse Rock, like how bill becomes a law, like being personified for me at that point in time. It has been interesting to see it. I've grown up here. I grew up on a farm in Oklahoma. I've been doing land use for 22 years. You see, some weird things on a case by case basis. I just, I know what I know, like, is muscle memory because I've done it for so long, right? So I can sit here and say that watching an agency do this, I'm like, there's no way that this will work. Like, they can't do this. Like, I know what the rules are as for development and retroactivity and, like, what's grandfathered and all of these things. And, of course, what I found in actually, because I just now testified for the first time in district court because I wasn't really allowed to in the OACs, right?
Right.
So I went and testified last week for the first time. And yeah, it's been really interesting to see I know the OBN's attorney, I mentioned this to you, like in the middle of court, mentioned that they're the ones that got us a safe harbor date. And so he's got so much conviction in saying, I'm like, was he? Like, man, I don't remember that like that. Am I making up things in my head? And that's when we went back and I was like, I know, because Senator Coleman, he's the senator for a property that I own. I'm one of his constituents. And I had met with him and another representative in August because they called and asked me to come meet them at a PCA meeting and, you know, helped. I think Governor Stitt, I don't think I know for a fact, they took this, you know, temporary permit authorization to work, you know, to Stitt himself, and then ultimately nothing ever came from it. There's been plenty of solutions provided to help give remedy to the infrastructure deficiencies in the state's development procedures. As to why those haven't been taken, I don't know.
Well, and that's the, you know, and that's the thing, and it really is, and that's really, you know, I really appreciate, you know, getting to work with you the last couple of years because again, yes, you know, I'm the political animal over here. That is, you know, this is the world I live in, and that world is what sets up, you know, the attorneys and everyone else. The work that we do is what sets the playing field, and that's why it's so crucial what we do. And obviously, I get really deep in on this. You know, a lot of y'all know that I've done campaigns and elections for 20 years, so. I dig right into it, and I'm not afraid, you know, to, you know, speak my opinion. But at this point, I don't even think that the things that I'm saying are not demonstrably true. You know, it's really hard. And I mean, ultimately, you know, maybe, you know, some of the judges on these cases, they, you know, they get an interest in what really happened during that legislative session. And, you know, I would just put this out there, if OBN wants to come into court and misrepresent their activities and what that legislative process looked like, I'm ready to come in as the Rain Man of cannabis law and how we got there in Oklahoma. And I'll be more than happy to talk to every single bit of this to make sure that it's, you know, that if that information is requested, it will be there. But for OBN to, you know, even insinuate they were doing anything other, in my eyes right now, and here's where I go political again, and I just call it for what it is. But, you know, we see all of these things, and it's real easy to say, Jed, this is conspiracy theory. They don't really operate like that, until we have our director come out and say, even if you're a legal business, we're working to push you out. Guys, when that statement was made a few weeks ago, this is how that is being done. This has been the vehicle, this process, this retroactive application, you know, has been the vehicle for it from what I can tell.
While I'm not political, I do want to say that having been so involved, and I do have so many like lifelong Oklahomans as clients, the impact of having to move all of these cases to Oklahoma County is extreme. You know, there's a common phrase in developments called NIMBY, not in my backyard. It's a lot different when a constituent is going to their local courthouse to plead their case. And like, these people know they've been there for these COCs. They've been trying to do everything, you know, whether they've been given bad advisement because they themselves got bad advisement from the state level. It's different. It's a lot less personal when you're in a bigger city and you have these people coming up. Well, you guys, everybody here knows about COOs. Everybody. So ignorance doesn't make any sense to you, but whenever you have an area where they don't know about COs, they're, you know, I can't tell you how many commissioners I talk to that also own businesses that don't have COs.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll speak about my personal experience too. I have an ex a while back that he is a doctor and we owned a doctor's office together. We had an OBN and, you know, not a COO. I had plenty of clients, a couple dentists and one doctor. They're like, man, I don't have to do this for my doctor's office and we don't have COOs. At that point, you know, it really gets into an interesting conversation.
Yeah. It really does, because it just shows how out of the norm this is.
Yeah, it's it's very weaponized.
Yeah, very, very weaponized. Very weaponized. I think that's a lot.
That's a lot. Yeah.
I think that's a lot for folks, but and, you know, again, and that's what
this is like bad therapy. I'm like, we're going to go back in time to the worst times of your life.
Well, the thing is that I wanted to, you know, talk about this some, and you know, just let everyone know. Kind of, here's a little more background. Here's some of the things that have gone on. This is, you know, this is atypical, and really just to let folks know that you've got some great professionals out here working on this. Everyone don't just take this laying down,
Yep.
and know that. Again, I see now started getting some calls here recently. The requirements coming in on dispos, and I expect we're going to see more of this, but also as we see um, how this moves forward, and I think that we are hearing that there is some pushback against OBN even in the Oklahoma County District Courts in some of these. It's still too early. I don't want to litigate anything here, but I remain fairly committed to again talking with lawmakers here this fall. I talk to them now, keep them kind of abreast of what's going on. And if OBN does continue down this road, again, with just an openly stated goal of putting people out of business, I actually told OBN this at their last permanent rules hearing, is that is, look, guys, you're going to do what you're going to do. I can't hold you accountable. That's lawmakers' job. My job is to hold lawmakers accountable. And so, I would encourage everyone that is dealing with this, make sure your lawmaker is aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
And how you're being treated, both your representative and your senator. And what's interesting is that as folks have been making these calls to these lawmakers, some of them don't really care, but some of them are actually helpful, and it shouldn't be this way to a degree.
It's the message that you give them.
But represent yourself well. Let those lawmakers know, because at this point in time, I know that there is not a bill that is in the ballpark of OBN that we will not scrutinize down to the last period. Doesn't matter what it covers, human trafficking or anything. They're suspect for slipping anything in anywhere at any time. We're going to be monitoring that. And as we get past our all-important task of State Question 837 signatures right now, we'll be dialing in November and December. And as this continues, if OBN does not relent in their persecution, then we're going to have some really serious conversations with our lawmakers, and we're going to have some expectations of actions from them. We'll see how all that goes, but remember, everyone, June 16th, 2026 is the state primary elections. We're showing up.
Is it actually on the 26th this year too?
No, it's actually the 16th.
Okay,
I'm sorry if I misspoke. No, it's June 16th. Yeah, it's June 16th of next year is when those primaries are. And again, guys, when you have agencies that are unyielding, in my mind, that they've just, and again, in my mind personally, and just straight politically, if OBN would have run this exercise, okay, filtered out the first 800 that were obvious, maybe the next 1,000 that were like, yeah, this really is going to kind of be more than what we get into. We don't make that money. It's not that. And then OBN says, okay, we got that. Now, here are a bunch of legit people that are really trying, so on and so forth. They could have took their foot off the gas at that point, but yet they persist. And so that's where we've got a problem. That's where we've got a real problem in how this is going and what they're doing. And our avenue are lawmakers, and then State Question 837 ultimately. But we're looking to make sure that we talk to lawmakers about this. And so it helps me out so much in advocacy and what we do here with ORCA. Don't be afraid. They're your lawmakers. Let them know what is going on as a professional business that you are. Makes it a lot easier when I go and talk to them. They say, yeah, I've had 3 or 4 people contact me about that. What's actually going on? Yeah. I say, okay, well, here's what's fair. Here's what's gone on. And here's what we're working through. And that's kind of what we're, just hoping to do here today a little bit, is just to have kind of sorted that out for some folks.
I think just to wrap up the highlights,
Yeah.
whenever you contact your lawmakers, these are the things that judges seem to be interested in, because you don't want to get off too far in the weeds about, conspiracy theories and like, is this, targeted, even if the evidence looks that way. At the end of the day, the real hot topic issues are that February 1st retroactive date. Why is that a date? It's arbitrary. What's the difference between before and after? The fact that you have selective enforcement, that they're not requiring the other registrants to have COOs. Again, personal clients that are dentists and doctors. Veterinarians, I pulled the registrations for all of those over the weekend, and there's plenty of them in areas without AHJ. There's at a minimum as many outside of AHJ areas, and even within probably that don't have COs, as there are now existing cannabis businesses.
Easily.
My understanding is that the OBN was unaware of that, and they're going to be moving forward with ensuring those registrants also have COOs. What's that going to do to the state infrastructure on an election cycle?
Yeah, can't wait to see that, because now you're going to double down again on the state fire marshal.
In the court case that I speak to, the OBN's attorney talks about the IBC and how it's always been a rule that commercial businesses had COOs. And I think it's also really important to note for cannabis businesses specifically that we have exemptions from building code for agricultural businesses that are in unincorporated areas not open to the public. A lot of these businesses are just small mom and pops on private properties and pre-existing accessory structures or utility structures who never had an exemption without a shadow of a doubt are the veterinarians, the doctors, and the dentists. There's reason to believe that cannabis businesses that are cultivating, you get into processing and other things, it's a little bit different, but there is reason to believe that they could have been exempt, especially with the issuance of tax exempt IDs for ag businesses. But where there's never been a question is on these other registrants. So I would just encourage you, if you reach out, be articulate on the matter. I'm happy to help you have some touch points too. I think that that's what our lawmakers and the judges are actually really interested in, is that this has been really selectively enforced.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, again, and I talked about it earlier, there's OBN's fallback, which is, oh, well, you were always supposed to have this, and that is under the interpretation of a law that says you are simply to follow all state laws.
And because there was an IBC,
right,
yeah.
Right. That is the base. At the end of the day, that is a really convenient thing to say in the time after they registered you with a COC, even though you were at that time also outside of that law requirement. Okay, like
agency who has access to all of the professionals that issues compliance for state laws and statutes release a document that says that you have an option for no code. How is that possible when we know for a fact now that this is the main grandstand that they're standing on? We always have had code. How does the state agency supply that document out? Like,
and here's the thing, and this is what everyone, that's the thing, is that, we've got a lot of folks, and I mean, and I get it, but you have a lot of folks say, well, I'm good, they can burn. That's the attitude of a lot of people in the industry towards other folks in the industry. But what you guys have got to understand is that there's something else in that law that OBN cited to be able to do this. You have to be in compliance with all state law. Okay, well, so every one of the cities, whatever, some folks at the HJ, yeah, you're good. Guess what? You got by. But there is also something in that law that says you are also to be in compliance with all federal laws. Now, OBN, the way they've done this, guess what? They could wake up tomorrow and choose violence against you based on that premise, and every single one of you, no matter who you are, how much money you got. And that's what a lot of y'all are finding out right now. You think you're big, you think you won't get messed with, but you are now, aren't you? This is the first wave. If they can get through on this, don't be surprised if they do that. Don't be surprised if Schedule 3 is used as a trigger mechanism to be able to do that. Now, that's, the ORCA crystal ball over here, that's my conjecture, but I've been right more than I've been wrong on this. We're watching it, hope you do too. Again, State Question 837, you get the signatures, we get that passed. Oh, believe me, there is a clause in there that will prevent this type of activity from state agencies in the future. So, it's just, this is, on one level for me, this is just fascinating. On another level, it's absolutely sickening. My heart breaks for, a lot of good people that have been just done horribly wrong. And it just brings nothing but indignation from me.
No, it's been heartbreaking. Like,
it really has.
Truly, people with their entire retirements and their retirement age, it's been it's been beyond heartbreaking.
Yeah, and I mean, this is, I mean, I think that now, and especially with, recent statements by the OBN, what I'm even talking about here, this is not a conspiracy. This is what happened. And maybe at some point in time, more of this will come out. There's so much more than what we could present right now, but I think this is an important, just kind of quick chat to have, and I
Yeah.
really appreciate you, coming and sitting with us today on this.
Taken a lot of calls from me because he's at the end of the day, clarity comes from the top, and so we've been trying to get that clarity, and you've been a major help in that. I'll also go ahead and post on my Facebook page, for the business and personal, just a list of kind of what the hot topic items would be for talking to your representatives, just
Okay.
because this kind of went fast and a little bit all over. But yeah, thank you for all you've done to try to get clarity on the situation, and happy to be a resource for you guys.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, everyone, we appreciate everyone that tunes in, that's been helping, that, when we put out the call, hey guys, it's time to, talk to your lawmakers. You follow through on that. For folks recently affected that have been on the sidelines before, welcome to the fight. Happy to have you here. Not even mad that, you didn't see a need to get involved earlier, but really appreciate that. We'll look at potentially revisiting this if we get a bunch of questions. We'll circle back around, and we'll work to, especially as we roll out of our 837 efforts here in early November, we'll look to really double back on this, and we'll be rolling up our sleeves for that. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Larissa, again for coming. Good afternoon, everyone. Jed Green, final boss here at ORCA. And today I've got a special guest with me, Miss Larissa Darnaby, Landmark Solutions. Really